is Jenny Slattery. I work in artist development with independent filmmakers, and I'm the co-founder of Early Bird Films, which is focused on supporting filmmakers in the early stages of their projects. And I'm so pleased to be here to discuss Narrowsburg for this wonderful Southern Circuit series. Southern Circuit screenings are funded in part by a grant from South Arts, a regional arts organization in partnership with the National Endowment for the Arts. For more information about the Southern Circuit and South Arts, please visit www.southarts.org. So I am very pleased to be joined today by Martha Shane, who is the director and producer of Narrowsburg and has made documentary films that cover a truly wide range of subjects, including After Tiller and Picture Character, or the Emoji Story, which is also featured in this circuit of conversations. So Martha, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. So I really enjoyed this film and found it very thought-provoking. In some ways, the film follows this kind of traditional arc of strangers come to town and then everything changes. But you also have made a really layered film and explored big questions about community, about dreams, and this industry we work in, the film industry. So I watched the film the other night with my husband, my mom, and my stepdad. And my stepdad usually has a fairly early bedtime, but he actually pushed past it to stay up later to watch it. And then we stayed up. Yeah, we stayed up even later to keep discussing it.
Cool.
So I'm so glad we have the opportunity to have this time and continue the conversation I'm sure many audiences had watching the film.
Yeah, that's so sweet that you watched it with your family.
It was great. It was perfect. I was like, my stepdad likes mafia stories. My mom was really into this couple, con artist story. And yeah, so it was exciting. So just to start, how did you find this story?
Yeah, well, I guess in some ways it sort of felt like this story found me. My co-producer on the film runs a film festival here in New York, and he rents out equipment to different people. And he rented some equipment to this woman who was running the Queens International Film Festival. And he didn't get paid. And after the whole thing, he was like, it's really weird. She just disappeared. Her number kind of isn't working anymore. She's not responding to emails. And it wasn't a huge amount of money, but enough that it was sort of like, well, let's try to figure out like what happened with this. And I just love a good mystery. I've always I spent all of my childhood just reading every mystery and thriller I could get my hands on. And so, yeah, that's how it all got started. And so through the process of finding out about the Queens Film Festival and Marie Castaldo, which was her name when she was running it, we learned that she had also had another name, Jocelyn Castellano, and had run this tiny film festival in upstate New York. And then also about her, other names and whole backstory. So yeah. And for a long time, the film was going to be sort of more focused on Queens and what happened there. But I just found myself so drawn to the location of Narrowsburg. I felt like the people who I met there were such incredible storytellers. They must have like the most great storytellers per square mile of any tiny town in America. And it felt like a sort of microcosm, like a smaller story, which could be used to understand some of the larger themes that I wanted to explore around, dreams and delusions and the power of cinema and all of that.
Wow, that totally makes sense. Wow, what a great way, and kind of circuitous in the way many of these paths go, way to get into it, but that's so interesting. So you spoke about mysteries, and I'm the same way, kind of constantly since I was younger, taking them in. And it seems, in addition to lots of people always loving those kinds of stories, it seems like we're in a moment where people are particularly fascinated by these con artist stories. So I'm curious, in addition to mysteries, if you've been someone who's been gotten obsessed with any of these kind of scammer stories, and how you see Narrowsburg fitting into that landscape.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm definitely drawn to those stories. I think they're so interesting because I think, in part because of the way they make us reflect on ourselves, I think.
Mhm.
Um, we're all sort of rewriting our own histories as
Mhm.
we go, I think, and telling our own stories in a way that kind of makes the most sense or kind of helps us. Um, and con artists often are just doing that to a much more extreme
Yeah.
extent. And so I think it's, yeah, we're all on a spectrum of con artistry, and some people are just further. um, and so, yeah, I think I've always been drawn to that. And, and I think I did another series that's coming out in April where I directed a
Mm.
couple episodes about some other con artists. I
Oh,
can't
okay.
tell whose stories it is yet, but I think it's interesting to look at these stories and see how similar and how different they are, and the
Mhm.
way that it can happen. When you go to a small town like Narrowsburg, everyone says, "Well, we don't want to be made to look stupid. Like we don't want to
Right.
look like we're fools." But
Mhm.
what you learn is like this can happen in it happens with wealthy people, it happens with poor people, it happens in small towns, big cities, everywhere. So there's just something about the human psyche where we want to believe. And if someone can offer you a dream, like to be in a movie or to be associated with a movie or to, be part of a film festival, like that's a really powerful thing.
Absolutely. That makes so much sense. So, yeah, that makes me wonder how, you talked about this fear, people in the town, and I think anyone who's been sort of conned in some way has, that they'll seem foolish, and just like easy marks. So, was it hard to get people from the town to participate in the film?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely took some multiple conversations with a lot of people. I did a bunch of kind of like, scouting trips just to
Mhm.
go upstate and just talk to people, meet people, and hang out and get people used to seeing me. And, generally speaking, the more someone had lost or
Mm.
um, the more they felt they've been humiliated,
Yeah.
the harder it was to get convince them to be part of the film. But ultimately, I think people told their stories because they wanted other people who might go through something else to understand that
Mhm.
they're not alone, and that this can happen to anyone. And, that said, there were people who just felt that the experience had been so damaging to them that
Yeah.
they didn't want to participate. And so I think with something like this, you always have to kind of accept that there's going to be some people who, no matter what, they just don't have the ability to like kind of go back and relive that because it can be so emotional. So
That
yeah.
that makes sense. That makes sense. It was interesting to kind of sense that either from people not participating or people who had been really damaged. But also on the other side of the coin, you get a sense from certain people that, like, yes, it was really upsetting, but there was almost a certain thrill to being part of a mystery. And like, was that something? I don't know if thrill is the right word, but that they got something from it. Like, was that a feeling you encountered as well from some of the people you spoke with?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I think some people who did lose money still said, but like, we got this amazing story.
Mm,
And, for Zach, who was a kid when
right.
this all happened, this was his introduction to the film business. So that's really like a profoundly life-changing
Yeah.
thing for him. So by giving people a dream,
Mhm.
Sometimes, they still get to keep that dream.
Totally.
And yeah, so it depended. And in my own situation, I could really identify with people who are like, yes, it was stressful. Yes, I got hurt in some ways, but I also got this amazing story to tell, because in some way the way that I came to this project and the way that my co-producer came to this project was this thing of like, well, we lost money, but like, wow, like this story is so crazy, and now we're gonna make
Yeah.
a film about it. And so it's really kind of making the best of
Yeah.
that situation. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah. It's a very resilient response, to
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And it was
um
actually amazing. I was just gonna say, because before COVID hit, we were able to screen the film in Narrowsburg. It was our
Mm,
second public screening, and so it was
amazing.
very. I mean, I was terrified. Like had two screenings there. One had like 500 people. I think the population of the town is still like around that number. So it really felt like everyone in town had come out for it. And
Wow,
it was a different experience than, I feel like the film does have a bit of like a dark comedy vibe, and there wasn't as much
definitely.
laughter from the people who had actually lived
Interesting.
through it,
That makes
um,
sense, yeah.
which makes sense, but which made it terrifying for me. But afterwards, it was really great because a lot of people were like, "This is very, really cathartic for the
Mm,
town," and so a lot of people said that. And then people who are new to town were like, "This is an amazing like piece of our history." Like a strange episode to revisit.
yeah, that's so interesting because I imagine it's hard and nerve-wracking to predict how people are gonna respond,
Yes.
um, but yeah, to find out that people took away very different things, and yeah, well, you mentioned, Zach, and this was his entry point, and I was so relieved when I saw that text of, "Oh, he was involved in these, like, huge projects," and
Yeah.
so impressive that he, like, pushed through that profound disappointment, it seemed, to keep going.
Yeah, yeah, I remember, well, when we interviewed him, it's not in the film, I don't think, but, he talked about how, after that experience of not seeing himself on the big screen, that's what made him initially wanna be an editor, because he was like, "I wanna be the person who decides what goes up
Oh,
there. I wanna be like the end of the line,"
fascinating.
you know? The person with control.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
fascinating. So there's kind of the participation of the town, and then of course there's Richard and Jocelyn. So I'm curious as well, how you got them to participate in the making of the film, and then if as the film evolved, they got kind of more into it or more resistant, like how that unfolded over production.
Yeah, yeah. So that was definitely the most challenging part, I think. And for a long time, I wasn't sure if I would have their participation, and so I was trying to figure out, how what the shape of it would be if they wouldn't. So yeah, with Jocelyn, I had written to her when she was in jail. When she got
Mm,
arrested for the stuff in Queens. I wrote to her at Rikers, and she wrote back and said, I think I'm going to be deported soon, but this is my email address. And
wow.
from there, yeah, we just corresponded a lot. When she was in France, and she was living with her family, and her family really encouraged her. What she told me was that her family really encouraged her to do it as a way of kind of putting her story out there, and putting a kind of giving closure to this like chapter of her life in the United States.
Mm,
Um, and she was, yeah, very cooperative at the time. Then she had some doubts later on, and what I was a bit aggressive with me later
yeah.
on, and it
Ah,
was, I think in many ways a good experience for me to have as a filmmaker, because I got to see a side of her that a lot of people who I'd interviewed and spoken to had seen, but that I hadn't really seen. And so I got to sort of a more complete understanding. But I was a little scared for a while, or stressed, I guess is a better word. And then with Richie, he was very hard to find just because, you know, he was always, at least the way he tells this story, you always have to like frame everything. What he said, you know, is that he's always got people after him for money. People are always trying to kill him. And so he was just always moving around, never staying anywhere for too long. But when we finally did manage to track him down, he was very like hospitable. He had myself and my co-producer over to his house for like Italian soup that he made and introduced us to his cat, very like friendly. And then, but it was funny because then when he came to do the interview, it was a couple days of interview, and he was he like gestured to me and he was like, you know, I can't stay too long. I gotta go talk to someone after this. And he gestures to me to come over, and he opens up this like briefcase, and there's a gun inside. And I was just like, okay, I guess I was like. It was interesting. It was hard to say, like, was he just trying to say, like, look, I'm the real deal? Or was he trying to say, you know, like, let's make sure these are softball questions? Or I don't really know, but it was yeah, it was surprising.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's a particular filmmaking experience. It's like not breaking from character here.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, fun. Yeah. So it was really interesting how the film was structured, because often with these stories, you get like the one person, the one head of the company, and maybe people are colluding or ignoring it, but like not as central. But here you have two people who function both in very different ways and also as a unit. And the structure is really interesting because it's sort of like focused a little bit more on Richie is like a more sort of readable character, the driving presence, and Jocelyn's more of a mystery. And then later on, later in the film, you really drop this information about her. And that's, you know, you have breadcrumbs, but I found that so effective. And I'm curious, like, did you always have that in your mind as the structure, or did that change as you learned more about their roles and filmed with them?
It definitely, yeah, evolved. I don't think that was initially the structure, but I think over time, and through spending more time with the people in Narrowsburg, it was very clear ultimately like that was kind of their experience, was that Richie was very much the front man. And so everyone thought that he was kind of responsible. And, you know, he had this criminal history and all of that. But then that as things evolved, and it turned out that she had actually been involved with similar things before and after had gone on to do similar things. I think it felt like that was like a twist that we needed to kind of keep the audience engaged. And yeah, and ultimately, like, I think it's very complicated. You know, I think that it was a kind of like perfect match in some ways, you know. They really their strengths kind of and weaknesses kind of complemented each other to be able to pull this off in a successful way. For a while.
That was definitely my impression. It's like an odd couple that actually they're sort of perfect foils for each other.
Yeah.
So yeah, in terms of the sort of like artistic approach you take, you know, you mentioned dark comedy, and I thought you were so deft in balancing tone, and also really effectively woven these different filmmaking styles. You know, in particular, there's a lot of film footage from both, you know, Richie's illustrious career and also, you know, these more classic films, including, you know, most of all, The Music Man. So yeah, I'm curious, like, when did those elements become an essential part of the film?
Actually fairly late was when they were like fully incorporated, I guess. Like we had rough cuts that used them much more, much less of them. And then I started, but it wasn't quite working. And I started editing at some point, and felt like, that it really worked with this whole question of like what is fact and what is fiction. It really worked with the stylistically, like the movie started to make sense the more of the fiction film footage you started to use. You started to see like the blurring of that line, and also really pointing to the way that people's memories of things and people's experiences are shaped by the narratives we experience through cinema. Um, so yeah, it was a sort of, so we basically started out with just the structure of the story, and I was thinking, oh, maybe I'm going to do more recreations actually at one
Mm.
point, and I thought I'd work with Richie, and then Richie died sadly while I was still working on the film, and so that wasn't going to be possible, obviously. And then I thought about other ways that I could tell the story, but yeah, this was just one. And then at one point we went way too far and started just like putting in tons of movie clips, like, and it was crazy. It became more like a bizarre, like experimental
Mhm.
film, and then sort of pulled back, and I think hopefully found like a happy
I
middle
think so.
ground. Yeah, but it seemed to work also with like throughout, um, the time that I was like screening it for people. And people always, it was very controversial, the whole thing with the projections in the interviews.
Mhm.
A lot of people hated it. And it was also like, once it was done, once I'd made that choice, there was no like unmaking that choice.
Yeah.
And so I think also, yeah, it just helped to have like the film clips in the sense of like something being projected. It made those kind of
Mm.
those projections in the interviews themselves make more sense to me anyway.
Yeah, no, I think that's no, I'm glad you brought that up because I think at first I was like, "Oh, interesting. Why this?" But then I think as time went on, it really, yeah, cohered. And especially I remember there's an interview with Jocelyn, and you see her projected when she's going kind of more inward. Uh,
Mm.
I think it's before she sort of like snaps at you. I'm trying to remember exactly, but that to me was really powerful because it's a similar image, but I don't know how to describe it. You sort of see how things like evolve over the course of being
Mm.
projected and not being, as immediate. So yeah, I'm curious to hear just a little, you were starting to speak to it, but a little more about that choice with the projection.
Yeah, well, I mean, it came out initially out of just experimenting. Like I said, my co-producer runs this film festival, and so we had a lot of projectors, and so we started playing with them, and thought it was an interesting look. And I guess to me, I thought, it's hard to figure out how to make interviews look
Yeah.
interesting. Like we see them all the time, and um, people don't usually try to do that much with them, I guess,
Yeah.
stylistically. And I guess I felt like, there's often a lot of shaping of the viewer's perception that happens with the way an interview is lit or where it's set, and all
Mhm.
these like small filmmaking decisions that go into shaping an interview. And a lot of those are kind of invisible.
Yeah.
Like, if it, and so I think by making the mechanism and the choices very obvious, we were kind of saying like, look, we are manipulating this, we are here,
Mhm.
like we are shaping kind of your perception of this interview and this person, with our presence, which every documentary is doing, but sometimes it's more subtle,
Right.
obviously.
That's so interesting. That makes so much sense to me. And also, I found it really effective how I mean, there's the projection, but there's also kind of like the dark, sort of more enclosed feeling in the room, as opposed to, the footage of the town feels more open. Like there's not that many buildings, there's a lot of space. It's usually daylight when you're shooting or when the footage is. So I thought that was such an interesting contrast and almost sort of echoed some of the balance and tone in a really cool way. So yeah,
Good.
I was a fan of the choice.
Thanks.
Um, yeah, speaking of film and the power of film,
Mhm.
you're exploring a lot of themes, but one is, both the draw of film and how it can be so powerful in a really meaningful, positive way, but also the darker side of this
Mhm.
industry. And I'm really curious to hear in sort of either when you were developing it or screening it, like what the response from industry has been. And I imagine it's different from filmmakers versus, funders or festivals. So yeah, how has that response been?
Yeah, it's been kind of fascinating. It is a little bit of like a Rorschach test or something. I feel like a lot of like industry people, sort of like when I sent it around to like sales agents and people like that, the response was like not. I mean, they were like they liked the film, but it seemed to make people very uncomfortable. They'd
Mhm.
be like, "Yeah, I don't know," because I think it's so much like their lives. They would say like, "My life is going to film festivals. Like, it's just impossible for me to judge this because it's like too
Right.
close." Kind of. So I think there was a lot of that from the sort of more official industry people. I think filmmakers I think, saw a lot of their own experiences in this. I think because if you're in the industry for long enough, like you're gonna meet, a characters like this. And these might be tame compared to, what a lot of the types of
Right.
people a lot of people meet out there.
Yeah. Different
So
story.
so some filmmakers would watch it and be like, I don't even see them as con art. Kind of like, like this is just like everyday life in the film industry.
Oh my goodness.
um, and yeah, so I felt like I learned a lot. And I was, I think it definitely made some people uncomfortable.
Yeah,
See
which
too
is
much of
maybe
yourself.
a good thing,
Yeah.
and I
Well,
imagine
and yeah.
in some ways too.
And I see myself, I mean, I think anyone who's a filmmaker who goes around saying like, I'm going to make this film and it's going to be the best. And, and you have to start saying that even when you've shot 3 days and you like, don't know what's going to happen,
Right.
because in order to get financing for something, you really have to believe in it and speak to that more. And at the same time, it's completely unpredictable. So, it's
Mhm.
like Brian, who's in the film, says like, it's sometimes you lie and you lie and you lie, and then something, the lie turns into a beautiful film, a beautiful dream, like,
Right, right.
and so I think, yeah, I could identify with it as well, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, that makes sense, and speaking of
Mhm.
sort of the lie turning into the dream and the eventual film, it was
Yeah.
amazing that the film did get made
Yeah.
for reasons. Yeah, and in terms of sort of the ethics of the film industry, it was such an interesting kind of like coda, the Tribeca premiere,
Oh,
and in some ways it like felt both like an attempt to really do the right thing by the film and the people but also sort of a continuation of this dishonesty and
yeah.
this dishonest way of navigating the industry. So I'm
Yeah.
curious how you reacted to that part of the story and like did it
Mhm.
seem sort of a milder form to you or did it seem like really of a piece with how Richie and Jocelyn were operating?
It felt, I mean, I loved it because, yeah, it's like it's great that the sort of happy-ish ending or is
Yeah.
like also sort of a scam. I love that it's kind of on that line. And I don't know, I see it two ways. Like I don't think it's similar to what Richie and Jocelyn were doing. And I think it's conning people to make them feel good, I
Yeah.
guess. And there wasn't really a downside. but I also feel like I kind of just marvel at like the way that, you know, people can make these like entire careers kind of out of showing their films at these kind of scammy film
Uh-huh.
festivals, or making it look like they have a premiere by renting a red carpet, or, you know, all those things. Like, and then you post it on social media and people see it and they go, oh, his career's going great, you know, like, and then you get other jobs from that. And
Mhm.
it's kind of like, yeah, again, like the lie can become the truth in a
Right,
way.
right. If it works for you, like
Yeah, who am I to say? I mean, you know, I guess I do think what's bad is like that there are so many film festivals out there that are sort of predatory, or like, you know, online film festival, pay $60 to like submit your film and then it'll be screened
right.
on, you know. And so I think that's sad. And I think I do think there's a lot of like barriers to entry in the film industry. Like, you know, that unless you're very privileged, it can be hard to find, you know, $600 to submit your film to like 10 you know,
Yeah,
and so not to mention even just making the film in the first place.
right, just that.
Um, yeah. But yeah, I just kind of marvel at all of it.
I know. I thought that was, yeah, pretty amazing. I loved that as much as it
Yeah.
was very sneaky. Um,
Yeah.
and then realizing kind of, oh, a lot of this footage probably is from that movie. What movies did he do before? But actually,
Yeah.
it came of it. So I think we
Yeah.
just have time for a couple more questions. But
Of course.
I'm curious. I imagine one moment a lot of people would have questions about or be
Mm,
struck by is the moment where, not the Tribeca premiere, but the Narrowsburg premiere when
mm.
you're talking to Richie and you bring up this was the moment where people turned on you, they realized what was happening. And he says, but we were all in tuxedos and watched the whole film, obviously.
Yeah.
Do you think in that moment, or do you have a sense of like if he was consciously lying or if he had come to believe this story?
Um, yeah, it's funny because, yeah, of course, like if you ask different people, they have completely different opinions on that topic. And for me, I actually do believe that he's telling what he believes to be the
Mhm.
truth. Um, I maybe I'm a sucker though. Like I found his reaction to be convincing in that moment, that he really was confused about what I was talking about and really remembered it differently. And I guess like again, like I don't know. I think con artists can be like real experts at that. Some of
Mhm.
them at sort of like believing their own lies.
Yeah.
But I also think like that happens. It's kind of a survival skill. Like it's kind of
Mm.
almost, it's not good to have a completely false idea of like what the
Right,
truth is
right.
of a situation. But if you can, but to reframe, you know, things that have happened to you that were negative
Mhm.
as positive in some way can be like a really good skill to have as a person, you know?
Right.
And so, yeah, and I think people like often, if you ask two people about the same event, you know, they'll see it in completely different ways as a success or a failure, and that it has more to do with them. So, yeah, that's my take. But I think most people I talk to are like, I think he was lying. That's what most people seem to think.
That's interesting. Yeah, I was kind of 2 minds about it, but one thing that made me think maybe he does really believe that. I mean, he seemed earnest, but also maybe he's a good actor, but also, like, that's so easily fact checked, you know?
Yeah,
So, like, why would he lie unless he's
I
just being
know.
super brazen? But I thought that was so interesting because you don't, you have your opinion, but you leave it very open to the audience to form their own impression.
Yeah.
Yeah, and finally, God, I feel like I
Yeah.
could, yeah, talk to you for a long time about.
Oh.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was curious. It was really fascinating to see and wild to see the updates on these different people at the end of the film, and I feel like I was surprised by each one of them, really. Um, so yeah, I'm curious. Have you stayed in touch with some of the people in the film, and do you have any kind of news to share of like where they are now? I mean, because it is launching this big film festival. But yeah, I'm curious if there's like been any other developments or if you're still connected to.
Yeah, yeah. I'm still connected to a lot of them. Brian, who's an actor who's in the film, we just like had Zoom drinks recently. Zach is doing great. He started going into podcasting, and of course like had amazing success with a podcast called Crime Town, which is
Right. Yeah.
related, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, the interesting thing with Jocelyn is that she basically, we had been in touch for many years while I was making the film. So the film took forever to make. But when I went to tell her, like, the film's finished, it's going to premiere, the phone numbers I had for her were dead, and all the emails I had for her were no longer. So I have no way of knowing if she's, I mean, in a way it's a fitting end to the story, kind of, but I have no way of knowing, is she alive? Like, does she know about this? Like, has she changed her name and changed her profession and is living a completely different life? Yeah. And so it's just it's an odd experience. The mystery continues, and maybe someday we'll see, like, there's a film festival in Madagascar and she's running it. I don't know.
Well, yeah. Well, I think that's kind of the perfect note to end on. The mystery continues. And it might be a part two.
Yes.
Because yeah, the kind of poof, they're gone. That's often part of the like mythic version of that story too.
Yeah.
So yeah, well, thank you so much for taking the time
Thanks so much.
and to speak with me and for sharing this film with us, which is just fascinating. And I enjoyed so much. It was such a pleasure to watch and to speak with you. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what you do next, Scam Artist Stories and beyond.
Thank you so much. This was lovely. I appreciate it.